On behalf of the Salt Lake Chamber, welcome everyone to our District 2 Candidate Forum. We are going to be covering all of the major races this election year. If you want more information, please visit our website at slchamber.com. My name is Jonathan Hafen. I'm joined by Kate Moss today. Kate is the Senior Vice President and over the Utah market for Bank of America. We are so excited to have her here today and to be talking to the candidates in the 2nd District.
Thanks, Jonathan. This forum will focus on the issues important to the business community. Each candidate will have approximately 30 minutes to respond to the questions that we have for them. The number of questions each candidate will get will depend on the length of their answers. So to waste no further time, let me introduce our first candidate. Please welcome Nick Mitchell, candidate for 2nd Congressional District. Nick, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
We are really excited to hear from you. Can you take a moment to tell us about why you're running for Congressional District 2?
I'm running for Congressional District 2 because I think that we need some new blood in politics. I think, term limits should be a thing. And I also believe that anyone who tried to have a part in overturning the election shouldn't be in office anymore. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, Chris Stewart was a part of that effort, and I don't believe he deserves the right to be a congressman.
So you ready to dive into the issues?
Oh, I'm ready.
Okay, here's the first one. ESG, That's a big deal to the business community. We're the voice of business here as the Salt Lake Chamber, and we're really curious to hear your views on whether you think ESG policies are beneficial for businesses, detrimental, or maybe even both. What do you think?
I think it's a little bit of both, but when it comes to businesses focusing on environmental issues, social issues, and governance, it only makes their business more sustainable for the long term. And so I find that extremely beneficial. Workers and consumers alike are looking for businesses who have these ideals and have a good score. But when it comes to the scoring system is where I have the issue, because the companies who claim ESG are able to pick and choose what data they release to these companies or to the investors, and I'm in science, and that's a cardinal sin. You can't pick and choose what you want people to see. You should have to release everything, and that's something the SEC is currently working on getting done. And once that is done, I think there's nothing but good things to say about ESG.
Awesome, thanks so much. Kate?
Yeah. So Utah is one of the best managed states in the nation. What would you like to see implemented on the federal level that we do here in Utah?
I think something that we do incredibly well in Utah, from a local level all the way up to the state level, is our fiscal responsibility. And that's something, in Washington, that's not always a top priority. And that's something I would like to bring to Washington, one of the many Utah ideals that we have that I want to bring to Washington. But in one area, I don't think we should be as tight with our funding, and that is with veterans. Recently, the PACT Act was presented and passed, and Chris Stewart voted against it. And that was just to provide health care for our veterans, who we owe an enormous debt to for everything they've done for us. And that shouldn't have happened. It should have been a unanimous yes across the board, because we owe that to them. We owe them so much more.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is broadband access. That's a big deal. It's basically imperative. Healthcare, financial information. Utah, we've got a lot of rural communities, and there are concerns about connectivity for the rural communities. What's your view on how we can help those folks out?
So it is a big issue, and I think COVID even highlighted the overarching issue that broadband internet is expensive, and not everyone can afford it, and especially in rural communities where there's one provider and there's no real free market, so there's no competitiveness, and so they have to pay these extreme prices to get the internet. And so we need to open up the marketplace a little bit with the federal government. We need to provide the infrastructure, because like roads, like telephones, internet is now becoming an infrastructure. Back when I was younger, it was more of a luxury. Now it's a necessity. Even with my son's school, it's becoming more and more online. And so we are leaving our rural communities behind. And there's actually been a bill presented. It's HR 1650, I believe, and 2 representatives, Burgess Owen and John Curtis, have signed on to it, but Chris Stewart has not. And we represent about 50% of the state of Utah, a lot of it rural, and you would have to ask him why he did not co-sponsor that bill.
Thank you.
Okay, water. The Colorado has constantly been in the news as many of the West are vying for the resources. What do you see would be an equitable solution for water usage on the river? What would that look like? And how should that policy be implemented?
You know, this is a multifaceted issue stemming from federal all the way down to state and local leaders. And it's something I've been doing a lot of research in. I like to do my own research so I can kind of speak with an air of authority on my positions. And when it comes to a federal level, earlier you had John Curtis on here, and he said, if we can't figure out a solution, we're gonna end up in court litigating. And that would take who knows how long for that litigation process to work out. There lies the issue. It is becoming an us versus them, and I need to get mine for my state. And we need to stop thinking like that, and we need to come together and work together and have this is all of us, we're in this together. And the first step with that is conserving water. And a lot of my district is rural. And so we have a lot of alfalfa farmers, and people in the more urban areas are saying, you know, it's the alfalfa farmers, it's a water-heavy crop. It's taking up all our water. At least alfalfa brings in revenue to the state. We also in Utah have the highest, or one of the highest, consumption rates of water in urban areas, which is a bad thing, but it also represents an area where we can improve, which means there's a solution. We can decrease the amount of water we're using in urban areas. And that's something everyone can do. And it's gonna take local, state leaders, HOAs saying, hey, you know what? Brown grass is okay. You know, it's okay to have. And I think that's a great place to start. And then we can continue to work with the farmers and not tell them what to do. Because I believe in coming together, listening to everybody, and coming up with a solution where everyone is happy and things actually get done.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is data privacy. We've got a lot of Utah businesses that do work, not just in Utah, but in other states and around the world. But domestically, what we're seeing now is a number of different states adopting data privacy laws that are different from one another. You've got the Virginia framework, California's done something, just as a couple of examples. If we were to standardize data privacy at the federal level and you were gonna run that bill, what would it look like?
It's a great question. Like I said before, you know, I'm a scientist, I'm a nerd, I unabashedly admit it. And I know personally the only way you can completely protect your data is using a VPN and the Tor network, and it's cumbersome. And Utah actually has its own data privacy bill. And a lot of these data privacy bills are a great start, but they don't go far enough. One of my major problems with the Utah, I'm gonna focus on the Utah bill because we're in Utah, is that only the Attorney General can bring lawsuits against these companies. And the Attorney General has taken donations from these big tech companies. So personally, I don't think he would go after these tech companies for our data privacy because he has taken donations from them. And so we should be able to file class action lawsuits as citizens against these companies. And when it comes to the data bill I would provide, it would be pretty strict, which is it's your data. No one can sell it. No one can make a nickel off of it. It's yours. If you want to sell it, you can sell it and you can reap that money. But that's it. None of these businesses should be able to control your data, have your information, and sell it.
Thank you.
All right. What can be done on a federal level to ensure that Utah is not only at the forefront of industry here locally, but also on the national stage?
You know, Utah's a great place, and a lot of companies are coming here. And we've had a lot of great startups that have proven themselves on the world stage. You know, we've had Qualtrics, Domo, Adobe's moved here, Instructure that runs Canvas. You know, we've had all these great companies that have either moved here or started here. And I think it's not that it's because it's Utah. I think it's because of the people in Utah who are known for being hardworking, honest individuals, and, you know, multilingual. Like me personally, I speak Tagalog. I used to speak a few others, but time has made it a little bit more difficult. But that's what attracts businesses to Utah, is that reputation that we have.
Okay, next question is about R&D, neuroscientists. So this should be a softball for you. Utah's emerging as an innovative leader in life sciences, medical research. What would you do if you were elected to help Utah become even stronger in those areas?
That's a great question. Like you said, no, I'm a scientist. R&D is actually my favorite thing. I have a small company with a patent, and, you know, hopefully I'm working on a couple more. And so it's important to have the workforce to bolster these innovative companies, because you can have the best ideas in the world, but if you don't have an educated workforce to maintain these ideas and help continue to improve these processes, you're not going to sustain as a company. So we need to make education more attainable, more affordable, so that everybody is given a chance to prove themselves that, hey, you know what, I may be from the inner city, I may not come from money, but I'm smart enough to be a scientist. I'm smart enough to go to college and get that degree. And that's where I think the federal government can step up and step in and do a lot to help with these innovative healthcare companies.
Thank you.
So Utah has been hard hit by the opioid epidemic. It's really disruptive to the lives of Utahns, and it's driving up healthcare costs. How should we be addressing this epidemic?
This is a real personal one for me. When I was in school, I was working 2 jobs, and I had a son on the way, and I was involved in a preventable work accident. And after the first neck surgery I had, they put me on fentanyl and said, "This is your new life. You don't have any other choice." And I went off of it cold turkey because it's no life to have. I don't remember the first years with my son because of it, and he didn't have a dad because I wasn't present, I wasn't cognizant. And so this epidemic of opioids can be traced back to the pharmaceutical companies who lobbied these politicians to make it so that they could push their drugs onto the doctors. And the doctors then prescribed these drugs, knowing very well that they did not solve issues, that they were more addictive than they were telling their patients. And so even though they're having this litigation settlement of $26 billion, I bet if you ask any but one of those families who lost a family member if they would rather have the money or if they would rather have their family member back, they would choose their family member. Sure. We, the people, shouldn't be paying for mistakes of the politicians like Jason Chaffetz, Mike Lee, Chris Stewart, who took money from these pharmaceutical companies, from these corporations, and turned a blind eye to what was happening. These pharmaceutical companies who made hundreds of billions of dollars should be the ones footing the bill, not us, the people. It is unfair and it is not right. And what I was taught from a young age is if you do something wrong, you own up to it and you do whatever you can do to make restitution for that fact. And they need to be held to that same standard.
Thank you.
So next question is about climate concerns, climate change. That's a big deal to Utah businesses. So you have that on one hand, and then you have the need for reliable energy that's affordable on the other hand. So if you were elected and approaching those critical energy issues, what would that approach be?
No, let's first talk about climate change, because it's not some unicorn that's maybe possibly happening. Chris Stewart, for a very long time, denied climate change was an issue. I'm happy to see the new Chris Stewart on the Conservative Climate Change Caucus talking about climate change, but he should have been talking about this 10 years ago. And so what we need to do as members of Congress is bring in innovations. Like in the IRA bill, I like to say, I was saying it before it was cool, but in the IRA bill, it talks about direct carbon capture technologies. And I think that's a great way to help bring down or bring out the carbon emissions out of the atmosphere. And when it comes to reliable, affordable energy, Utah is sitting on a gold mine of geothermal energy. We could supply most of the US with energy and become a leader in clean, renewable energy. It just takes a congressman who cares enough to push for it. I care enough to push for it. There's also this new technology that I talked to a gentleman who had PhD after his last name, and I was talking to him about it, and there's this new type of nuclear energy called thorium salt reactors, and that has a lot of potential. And right now I believe it's in Milford, there's a small theoretical reactor down there that they're working on, and they're afraid they might have to move up to Idaho because of regulations. I would help push through those regulations so that technology could stay in Utah. And with bringing in all these geothermal thorium salt reactors, all of this, it will help revitalize these rural communities that are suffering so heavily. It will help bring in that broadband internet because companies need it to run. You know, it solves so many issues, but we need a congressman that can see into the future, that has ideas, and that has a plan for everybody.
Thank you.
All right, cybersecurity is our next topic. It seems like every day we hear about another cybersecurity breach. What is Congress doing, or what should they be doing to protect Americans and businesses from these attacks?
The way of war is changing, and we all know that. Chris Stewart knows that. He's said it. We all know it. The problem is, once again, education. We for some reason think education is something that only the rich should be able to attain, or those who are able to afford going to school without taking out those predatory loans. So if we made it so school was attainable and made it so people that may not know that they're good at coding or may not know that they're good at cybersecurity can have a chance to prove their mettle, that would help a lot. Like, for example, I played college football. You know, I played up at the U, and it's hard being an athlete and going to school, and so my grades weren't the best, and so I went to the Dean of Chemical Engineering, and I sat down and I talked with him, and I said, listen, I know my grades aren't good enough right now to make it into the chemical engineering program. Give me a chance to prove that I can make it. And he said, okay, I'll let you take the introductory course. If you pass it, you're in the program. I got a B+. People just need opportunities to prove themselves. And a lot of the issues that we're facing come down to an educated workforce. Educated workforces make for a stronger economy, and they make for a stronger America. And that's what we need right now.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give you a chance. One last sort of summation question and answer. We get on the elevator together, main floor here, Utah 1. We've got to go to the 23rd floor. Those are our offices up here. What's your elevator pitch? You got a voter from the 2nd District and says, Nick, why should I vote for you? What do you say?
Why should you vote for me? I'll look at the camera for this one, because I care about you. I don't care what political affiliation that you have. The problems that we are facing as Americans don't care what political affiliation you have. All they care about is the solutions that we can provide as Congress people to help stem the issues that we have. One thing that I always tell my son when he's having problems on his homework or something like that, I say, Mason, with every problem, there is a solution. It may not be the solution you're thinking of, but there is a solution. In Utah, I am that solution.
Nick, thanks for being here today. Thanks for taking the time. It's been fun getting to know you a little bit better and hearing about your positions on the issues.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Congressman Stewart, welcome. We're so glad that you would take the time to be with us today. And I know you're just finishing up your 5th term, so happy anniversary. It's been 10 years. And what we'd like to do, despite the fact that you've been serving for a while, is to have you introduce yourself to the voters of the 2nd District.
Well, thanks to both of you, John. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. We look forward to it. We obviously love the chamber. You know, one of the things I say in my introduction, I would say, is I was a small business owner. I know it's the heart and blood of the American economy. I know kind of the stresses, the things that small business owners worry about. And I know that not everyone in the chamber is a small business. So you got a lot of big businesses as well. We're grateful for our associations with you. And it's interesting because even though you have been in Congress, you think, well, everyone knows me. It turns out a lot of people really don't. So I'll just say quickly, grew up in Cache Valley, come from a large family. My father was an Air Force pilot. I tell people all the time, these are his Air Force wings. He was a pilot in World War II. 5 of his sons served in the military. I was proud to serve as an Air Force pilot. Some of the happiest years of our lives was for my wife and our family. We were time in the military. Got to do some cool things, have 3 world speed records, fastest nonstop flight around the world. I tell people all the time too, it's a lot more fun than being in Congress, our time in the military. I was a small business owner, as I said. I'm a writer. I've written, you know, a bunch of books, New York Times bestseller. But the, you know, thing I do now is I represent the 2nd Congressional District. I'm honored to do that. And the most important thing I would say is I'm a father, I'm a husband, 6 kids and 15 grandkids. And I think that's the kind of thing that keeps us kind of straight and on course is what are we trying to do for our country? What are we trying to do for our kids?
Awesome, thank you. You ready to jump into the issues?
You bet.
First one's ESG.
Yeah.
Good thing or a bad thing?
It's a terrible thing.
Why is that?
I mean, basically what happened here is, you know, many of the progressives in Congress and now our president said, hey, we would like to implement these policies. And they tried to do it through Congress, which is how they should, right? It should be passed by law, it should be legislation. And the reason that's the best answer is because that reflects the will of the people. If it has public support, then Congress will respond to that. Congress will pass that. But they couldn't get it through Congress, even through a completely Democratic Senate and Democrat-controlled House and the White House. And so they said, well, then let's try and do it through the regulators. And so you have this example of Utah, which is, as I know you know, one of the best managed states in the country and has been for years. And everywhere I go, people recognize, hey, there's something special in Utah. Businesses want to come here. Families want to come here. One of the greatest places to live, and it's, as I said, Utah benefits from this culture, and it's a very, very well-managed state. I'm talking now financially. And yet the regulators, those who evaluate states' financial health have downgraded it, not because there's been any negative findings or any negative impacts on the financial side. It's because they don't like some of their ESG policies. They think they're too friendly to the oil and gas industry, for example. Well, I think that's absurd. I mean, a fiduciary, someone in the financial industry, should be concerned about the financial side, not about environment or social justice. And if you want to implement those policies, then let's have that debate in Congress. But that's not what happened. They've given it to the regulators, and so the outcome now is that you've got actually a warping of the market. You've got information that doesn't have to do with financial health or financial accountability that's influencing these ESG ratings. And I think it's deceptive, and I think it's unfair. It's not a fiduciary. And you got good outcomes like Utah who are being punished because they're not as woke as they should be.
Thank you.
Or at least they're not as woke as they should be in some people's minds.
Kate, your turn.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Good to see you, Kate. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice to have you here, Congressman. So you alluded in your last answer that Utah is one of the best managed states in the nation, and that's something we all agree on. What specific practices do we have here in Utah that you would like to see implemented on the national level?
I think, Kate, that's a really great question, and the answer, I think, is actually a little bit hard. If it was hard or easy to answer that, I think a lot of states would be trying to emulate it, right? But it's harder than just, well, if you do these 4 things, then you're going to have this magic outcome. But it's more ambiguous than that. I think there's a couple things. We've mentioned one of them already. We're very fiscally conservative. And honestly, this is a little bit of a flippant answer, but I kind of mean it. One of the reasons we're so managed is because we have Republican leadership, and Republican leadership not only as the governor, but in both of our House and the Senate, state Senate as well. And because of that, they're fiscally conservative, which I'm grateful for. Interestingly, we're a very welcoming culture in society as well. Good example of that. And something I've spent a lot of time on over the last 3 or 4 years is a bill we call Fairness for All, which says we can protect LGBT community, but we can also protect religious liberty and religious rights. And Utah has kind of cracked that nut. We did it in the Utah Compromise in 2015, where we said we can do both. And a result of that is we have virtually no litigation over these issues anymore. We have a culture that says, hey, we don't want to discriminate against anyone, but we also don't want to, impede against someone expressing their own religious faith or their own religious belief. I think an important one in Utah as well is we still are good at educating our children. And I can't tell you the number of people I talk to around the country. And it's actually kind of discouraging to hear this. It makes you proud of our state, but it also is kind of discouraging because you realize that other states have so much trouble. But they say to me, hey, if I come to Utah, can I put my kids in public school? Because I'm homeschooling right now because I just can't trust my own public school, and I don't want to homeschool. Many of them are working moms or working dads. It's a tremendous responsibility to homeschool. So they ask me, if I come to Utah, can I trust the schools that they're not going to, teach our kids, things that are, so stressful and troubling that we've seen in so many places. And then I think the last thing is we have a culture here of, I think, independence. A culture of, I don't need someone to take care of me. I'm going to try and take care of myself. I don't need the government to take care of me. I'm going to try and take care of my own family. And I think the combination of those things really make for something kind of special here.
Thank you.
Okay, next question is on broadband access, especially in rural communities. You've got some rural communities as part of the 2nd District. What can be done to make sure that people have access to the internet when it has become so important for healthcare, financial reasons, and otherwise?
And it has become so important. Yeah. I grew up in a little tiny town, 295 people. As I said, I grew up farming and ranching. And I represent, enormous rural parts of Utah. If you looked at a Utah map just very quickly, and the 2nd Congressional District was highlighted, I mean, you would think, oh, he's got almost half the state, because geographically it is nearly half the state. I have where we are right now, downtown Salt Lake City, but then we go west and south to St. George, and then all the way east over to the Colorado River. I mean, I represent some counties that there's a few thousand people in the entire county. And, 10 years ago, maybe rural broadband wasn't as important. But as you were saying, Mr. Hafen, when you talk about education, when you talk about one of the positive outcomes that came from COVID was we accelerated telemedicine, the ability to actually talk with the physician, talk with the doctor without having to drive to Salt Lake City to do that. But that only works, again, if you have broadband and if it's reliable and if it's faster. Then you just can't do that with dial-up. So now you ask, okay, well, what's the solution for it? There's actually good news on that, and that is there's been hundreds of millions of dollars allocated just to Utah to bring broadband to the rural parts of the state. I think that's a beautiful thing. Again, my responsibility is to represent my constituents in these very rural parts of the district, and we support that. More than that, though, because it actually may not make sense to run a fiber cable for 20 miles to come to a community with maybe, in some cases, a dozen homes. It's just so expensive. Technology can actually help here. Some of the things, Starlink, for example, that allows people to upload and to have access through satellite technology that even just a few years ago wasn't available. And by the way, that wasn't developed by the U.S. government. That was developed by the market. That was developed by private enterprise. And kind of a sidebar but fun story, and it illustrates this. During the initial invasion in Ukraine, I mean, that's how they were communicating with each other. That's how the Ukraine military was communicating, because Russia tried to take out their communications, as you can imagine. They were able to sustain that through Starlink. And I think that's, again, a good example of how technology can accelerate this and probably do it for less money than we would expect. Like I said, to run a cable out to a small community may not be the best way to do it. We should look at other options as well.
Thank you.
All right. The next one is about sharing the use of water along the Colorado River. So resources are scarce, and we're sharing them with all the other Western states. What should our policy be for each of them?
Yeah. Utah's in this kind of unique situation, and it's a bit of a challenge because on one hand, we're the fastest growing state in the nation, have been for quite a while. On the other hand, we're the second driest, and you can't have people without water. And we're not talking just to water your lawn. I mean, we may have to completely relook at how we landscape and how we beautify our state, that we may not be able to do that like we have in the past. But you have to have water to drink. You have to have water to sustain people. Also interesting, it's always been the case. We've always been a desert. The second driest state in the country didn't start last year or 10 years ago. It's been since we were first settled. And so I live in Farmington, and I love to kind of share this with people, that I water my lawn from water that comes out of canyons 20 miles away. But our pioneers built this remarkable irrigation system where they pull the water out of the canyon, they move it along the benches, and they allow us to get water all along the Wasatch Front. It's a beautiful thing, and they did that in the 1800s. But it's not enough now. We have to do more. So to your question about the Colorado River Compact, I think there's a couple issues on that. First thing is, and I don't mean to punt the question at all, but this is something that is going to have to be settled by the states. The federal government can't and honestly shouldn't involve itself in this point. Now, there may be a point when we have to, but I hope not. The second thing is, I actually have great confidence in our state's ability to defend our rights there and to defend our interests. They've done a remarkable job at it so far. I think the starting point should be, we should honor the compact as it was agreed to, even though it's been 100 years or so. But we shouldn't concede those rights that we were allocated. Now, last thing, we're in a drought. We all know that. And because we're in a drought, there may have to be some modifications to that compact, which really is the conversation we're having now. If we had all the water that was originally allocated, and if we weren't in a drought, there wouldn't be the contention. But the reality is we're in a drought, and it's not just a year. It seems to be a long-term drought. That makes it a little bit harder. But once again, the states, I'm very familiar with their negotiations. I'm very familiar with the players that are, and I have great trust in them. I think the courts are involved in different pieces along the way, and I actually so far have been in agreement with the courts and their decisions. So although it's a problem, I'm optimistic that we're going to have a good outcome on it.
Thank you.
Next question is data privacy. And right now we've got the states regulating data privacy. You've got the Virginia framework. California's passed its own bill. I think a lot of our businesses are worried that we've got a patchwork of legislation, and we'd like to see something happen at the federal level. Let's say you're running a bill. What would that look like?
Yeah, well, a couple things. Number one is this is something that probably can't be done and shouldn't be done state to state. We don't live in islands of states. It's clearly interstate commerce, especially when it comes to technology. It has to be kind of a federal framework. The second thing is some of the priorities. You got to protect children, especially children's privacy. You got to protect HIPAA, patients' rights, as we've talked about, as you expand medical care through some of the technology that would otherwise perhaps be violated or breached. Got to protect patient privacy. But after that, I don't think that we've really got good ideas right now, and it's really something that we're going to have to wrestle with. There are probably, I don't want to say several, but maybe as many as a dozen bills in Congress right now that deal with this. They're really quite a bit different, and it's not something that Congress has taken really very seriously yet. I think we're going to have to, but it's really early in the process now. And I could elaborate on that, and the reason being is because working in intelligence and national security like I do, it's something that we've spent quite a lot of time thinking about. But I'm going to leave the question short if I could, and I hope we can get to questions about economy and energy independence and energy prices, some things that other things that people care about as well. So I'll be brief on this, and hopefully we have more time for more questions.
Those will be coming right up.
Good.
Okay,
Good.
with the economy's next.
Yeah, great.
So what can be done on a federal level to ensure that Utah not only shines here at home, but we are also a star on the national stage?
Yeah.
World stage, excuse me.
It's kind of an interesting question. I think maybe the way you phrased it is interesting in the sense that as a federally elected official, I love Utah and I'm proud of Utah and want to support Utah, but my job is to our nation. It's really to a little bit of a broader responsibility. And I trust the leadership of Utah, as I've already said. So I view my responsibility isn't so much, how do I help the Utah economy, although that's part of it, certainly part of my job, but how do we help our society and our nation broadly? And I think there's a couple things. One is we've got to deal with inflation. I mean, oh my gosh, if you don't hear from people about this, consider yourself lucky, because I hear from people all the time, and I should hear from them. This is very, very painful for people. And I'll give you just a simple example. Like a lot of people, I have kids, as I mentioned, and some of them live here in Utah. We love to get together on Sunday afternoons and have dinner. And my youngest daughter called me a couple months ago, and she said, "Hey, Dad, we'd love to come, but we just can't afford the gas right now. We're not going to come up this weekend." I mean, that's just a tiny example of the impacts this is having on people. And if you want to ask the question, how do we support businesses in Utah? How do we support businesses around our country? You have to give them the right economic environment. And one of those is you've got to handle inflation. You've got to tackle inflation. And the answer to that is actually pretty simple. We've spent too much money. We've spent $10 trillion in the last 2 years. It's an unimaginable amount of money. And I could go through it and tell you how that was spent. $10 trillion in 2 years. It's a really simple outcome of that, economics 101, but it takes a seventh grader could understand this. If you have that many dollars chasing a certain limited number of goods, of course you're going to have inflation. If you want to have a strong economy in Utah, we've got to address inflation. I think the second thing is, what a shame that we're no longer energy independent like we were 2 years ago. I mean, the entire country was using U.S. energy, and we were paying $2.21 for fuel. And now we're excited because it's only $4.21, because it was $5.40. But, we're going to see this migration of manufacturing to the United States, or we did, because we had low energy costs. And, that's a great key to our economic future. Let's have manufacturing come back to the United States. But we can't do that if we don't bring down the price of energy once again. And then the last thing I'll say is, and this is true in Utah, but it's a great example, you got to get a regulatory environment that doesn't punish businesses. Our oil and gas industry in eastern Utah, it's not my district, but it's very important to the state and to the economy. And they feel like they've had their heads beat in over the last couple of years. They've been villainized. They've been demonized. I mean, they tell banks, don't work with the oil and gas industry. I mean, we should support our oil and gas industry while we're in this transition to a cleaner environment. But that's not going to happen between now and the weekend. It's going to take several years. In the meanwhile, we got to have oil. We got to have gas. Let's not make them and turn them into the devil. And I think that's one of the things we could do to specifically support a healthy economy and healthy business here in Utah.
Thank you.
Let's look at a different sector, healthcare and life sciences. Utah's viewed as an innovative leader in the country in those areas. What can we do to keep the momentum going in those markets?
You know, I love the life sciences and innovation and the economy that's developed here. And it's actually happened in just the time I've been in Congress. We watched these professional organizations as they began to work together and as they banded together to create kind of a life sciences lobby, if you will, a group of companies that work in that space. And I've been to some of those companies that when I first met them, they had 12 employees. And you go down there now and there's 3,000 employees. And it's not just one company. And I love the fact that we're in that space because it really is one of the spaces of the future. Biological innovation, the life sciences are where we're going to see some of the most remarkable advancements and achievements towards human health and human quality of life. And to your question about how do we support them, I got to go back to my previous answer because I think it really is a bit of an overlap. Give them a strong economic environment. Make the regulators support them. Understand there's a role for regulation, but not impede their work, not make it impossible for their work to go forward. Give them a business loan at 2% instead of at 8%, like I'm afraid we're going to see, in a few weeks from now. Create an environment where they can grow, have the regulators help them, but not impede them. And if we do those few things, they're so strong, they're going to continue to explode. It'll be fun to watch what they look like in 10 years from now.
Thank you.
Right. So another area in the healthcare space is the opioid epidemic. It's really disruptive for anyone who's affected by it. It drives up healthcare costs. How should we be addressing this issue?
Well, with opioids, can I add fentanyl as well? Because it's also becoming nearly as prevalent and as deadly as opioids. And I think if I were to ask a group of 100 people, how many of you have been impacted by this with someone you know? 10 years ago, not so many. You ask that same question now to a group, and honestly, the majority would probably raise their hands. Good news is Utah hasn't been nearly as impacted as some parts of the nation. Appalachia, for example, unfortunately has a reputation of being decimated by this, but we certainly do pay price. One of the really fun things I get to do is go ride with police officers and just see what they do at night. And in my experience, and I think it's not an overreach to say that a large majority of what they do is spent with some kind of drug-related crime. One other thing I'll mention is I think China has used this as almost just a kind of a low-grade warfare against America because they facilitate this trade so much. The precursors for fentanyl, almost all of that comes from China. It goes to Mexico and then eventually finds its way across a border. So 2 things. Number one is support our local law enforcement. And again, one problem we don't have here in Utah, and I pray we never will, but many parts of our country do, and that's prosecutors and district attorneys who just don't take this problem seriously. And so they don't punish those who traffic in these very, very dangerous drugs. And much of the crime, much of the violent crime, much of the murder that we see is attributable or connected to drug trafficking. And they just have to connect those 2 dots. And the second thing, unfortunately, is our southern border is now just a spigot of illegal drugs, including these very, very dangerous drugs. It's not just dope coming across the border. It's fentanyl. It's opioids. It's these other very dangerous drugs. And the southern border is a real mess right now. And I don't think we're going to get a handle on fentanyl in Appalachia or in LA until we make it harder to bring it into the country by being much, much better at securing our southern border.
Jonathan?
Okay, next, you touched on this a little bit, Congressman. This is back to the energy sector. And we've got climate change concerns. I know you have some of those yourself. You've talked about that recently. But we also need affordable and reliable energy supplies. So what should Congress be doing about those 2 areas?
You know, I think the starting point, two maybe starting points. Number one is it's not an either or. We can and we should do both. The second is sometimes there's a presumption, and I say this kind of smiling, but it's really true, where people will say to me, oh, you're a Republican, you don't care about the environment. Well, I mean, that's nonsense, isn't it? I mean, the reason I live in Utah is because I love Utah. I love to ski, I love to rock climb, I love to be out in the mountains. All of us want to be here, I think. And, you know, the presumption is, once again, we want to protect our own state. So climate change, you know, when we wake up in February and we see the haze over the valley, that's not something I don't think anyone likes or appreciates. So I'm really proud of all of the above. And let me illustrate that if I could. I can take you down to southern Utah, where we helped clear the way to put one of the largest wind farms in the country on BLM land, that it was a perfect use for this federal land. I climbed up on top of one of those windmills and I could look south to one of the largest solar farms that we also helped clear the way to put that on federal land. We were key in getting $500 million for the University of Utah for their Forge project, which is geothermal. And the availability of geothermal could change, I mean, could dramatically change our entire energy equation that we have. In the meanwhile, we have to support and recognize that until we have these facilities built up, and the key to that, and it's a long conversation one we don't have time for today, but until we figure out where we're going to get the rare earths to build these batteries, because we truly don't know the answer to that yet. While we're working through these problems, you got to realize natural gas is a great alternative. And you got to realize we're going to have to use oil and probably some coal in creating electricity and the manufacturing that we talked about. So all of us want to go to cleaner energy, but we got to do it in a responsible way. And look at Europe this winter. Oh my gosh, those guys are looking at a catastrophe because they simply didn't have the baseline energy production that they needed. And they relied too much on one source, which was unreliable. And it's, you know, some folks in Europe are looking at, you know, the equivalent of $2,000–$3,000 a month to heat their homes. Same thing for small business. They won't survive that. They've got to do something in the meanwhile, and we want to avoid that type of a real problem, a catastrophe for us. So support them all. One other thing is, while we're doing that, we don't talk about very often, but nuclear power. The small modular reactors that have been developed up in the Idaho labs up there. Utah is some of the first communities in the country to buy some of that energy. And I'm so grateful that Europe recently designated nuclear power as renewable. And that opens the door now for a lot of access, a lot of funding that I think will make a positive impact as well.
Thank you.
Great. All right, Congressman, we have time for one last question. So if you were on an elevator with our audience, what would your elevator pitch to them be?
Yeah, so is it a fast elevator or a slow elevator?
It's up to you.
Well, let me say first how honored I am that they've given me this opportunity, and I really mean that. I mean, I don't think my life will be defined by my time in Congress, but it is such an honor to represent the people here. And, you know, if I go to Home Depot, sometimes people come up and yell at me, but sometimes people come up and thank me. And whether they agree with me or whether they don't, it's still an honor and still my responsibility to try to represent them as best I can. I represent a conservative state, a conservative district. So I guess part of the elevator pitch would be, well, if you're a conservative, you want to vote for me. If you believe in some of the things we've talked about today, you want to vote for me. One thing we haven't talked about hardly at all is national security. And the importance of that, where I actually have to spend a lot of my time because of my committee assignments and some of the, you know, my background in the military. If you worry about what's going to happen or what's happening in Ukraine, if you worry about China, if you worry about, you know, the mullahs in Iran, then you need someone who's a national security expert, someone who's a leader, a national leader in national security and intelligence. So, but at the end of the day, I think this most important thing, I believe in faith. I believe in my family. I believe in my country. I believe God cares about our country and wants to continue to bless us. And if you share those same ideals, then I would hope they would see that I do, and I would earn their support as well.
Thank you, and thanks for the time today.
It's
We
an honor
really
to be with
appreciate
you.
it. That concludes our District 2 Candidate Forum. We wish these candidates good luck and good health in the weeks ahead. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Our thanks to the staff of the Salt Lake Chamber, Policy Impact Communications, and their campaigns for the support of this event. Have a great rest of your day.